Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to give you a little moment just to join. Hopefully you've got this on the countdown. It's the first time I've used it actually, so I sort of popped a little reminder that I'm going to be all of those who actually set that reminder, and hopefully I'll see you all in a moment. So my name is Simpkin. I know there might be a lot of people here who don't know me or haven't worked with me or haven't watched me do one of these. And actually I haven't done Instagram and Facebook. So what I do is I do workshops, and these are the types of workshops that I do at home or on my health retreats. But I figured right now we've got so many people at home, we've got so many people wanting to learn things. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to translate exactly what I do in my work on an Instagram live and a Facebook live. So I've really gone all out here because rather than just choose one or the other, I've actually got two phones. So I've got one here with Facebook and one here with Instagram. I've tried to put them as closely as I can. And so if I'm not looking at you directly and I'm looking vaguely in that vicinity, that's why. But I will try and really make it as personal as possible. And in fact, I do have my lovely daughter who is assisting me, and if there's anything that you want to be asking me throughout or letting me know you're there, that would be so brilliant because I can't see that. She's going to let me know. So if you're there and you're ready for me to go, then just a quick thumbs up in the comments would be amazing. We will get going. So I've joined, I've offered to do this today, and I've offered to really go back to basics. Tomato sauce is basic, I can do that. Well, that's brilliant. And for those of you that are tomato sauce, do not think that this session is going to be wasted. All of my sessions is throughout, I'm offering nutrition tips and cooking tips and kitchen tips. And so I really hope you'll be gaining from that throughout this session. But also, I'm also going to be talking about how you can use those tomato sauces, because sometimes we just simply lack inspiration. But once you've gone to the trouble of making a homemade sauce, then I really, really want to show you how you can use it and just give you some ideas. And actually, by the same token, I would love your ideas too. So that's where we're going with this. I envisage we'll be on here for about 20-25 minutes, maybe longer if you want it to be. I'm all yours, and we're here to hopefully have an interactive session and also for you to learn and to be inspired a little bit with some cooking. So I hope you're all doing okay. We've got to Friday. It feels like a very, very strange Friday evening or Friday afternoon. You know what? It's fine. We've got a great opportunity to spend some time together and actually learn. And I really hope you find it useful. So, are we ready to get going? We've got lots of people on. We're getting there. So we'll keep, I'll keep all the way through. People will join. This session will be on there, on my feeds, so if you do miss the beginning or you do miss it completely, it is there for you to go back to. So the first thing we're going to do is just talk about what you can actually use, because there's actually so many different types of tomatoes that you can use. You don't only have to use tin tomatoes, okay? Now, when you've got tin tomatoes, one of my favourite tips to give out is to try and buy the ones that are whole tomatoes, because I think then you know exactly what's in this tin. You haven't got any odd bits, you haven't got any remnants, you've got the whole tomato. I'm not picking out brands, but one thing I would say is a good quality tin tomato actually goes a long way. You get that richness and depth of flavour. But if you haven't got tin tomatoes, then a passata will do. And a passata is basically crushed up tomatoes with water. So you've basically got a lot of hard work already done for you, and it's quite concentrated, and it's pretty much a ready-made sauce that you can then add things to. So that's a really great one that I hope you've all got in your larder at the moment. Now, tomato puree is exactly the same thing, but without the water added. So it's basically dried up, crushed up tomatoes with the water added. So without the water added, sorry. So when you use it, you get that really, really concentrated depth of flavour. And I like to add a little bit to any tomato sauce that I'm doing, just a tablespoon, because I think you get that added richness that really makes all the difference. Now, a lot of you have also asked me, you know, can you use fresh tomatoes? Absolutely you can, and they are fantastic to use when they are almost heading for the bin, okay? So they're not off, they're not moldy or anything like that, but if you've got one or two, say a couple of cherry tomatoes that might be, just remove them and wash the rest of them. Right now we don't want to be wasting anything, but I can assure you it will be safe and clean. So just remove the nasty ones if you've let them go and wash them, and they will be perfect for a sauce. And they're perfect because they're overripe. Overripe means they've got extra flavour. That's going to add flavour to your sauce. Okay, now if you haven't got any overripe ones, I wouldn't waste fresh tomatoes in a sauce. You can, but I don't think you get that depth of flavour. But if you have only got fresh tomatoes, then I would definitely use them. And then perhaps if you've got some puree, you can just add a bit to it. But really it's entirely up to you. And if you are only using fresh tomatoes that are not that ripe, then you would want to add a lot more flavour and let it cook for a lot longer so that you can let a lot of the water evaporate and you get that richness as well. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get going, but I have also made one. So once the one that we make together is cooking, I'm going to show you what I will be using my tomato sauce for today. And I hope that will inspire you and also give you lots of other ideas. So just quickly before I start, I've also got some little cherry tomatoes and also sun-dried tomatoes. These really, really do add richness. So they're great, they're jars. You can keep them forever and then you've got something that you can make a sauce with immediately. So really worth doing. Before we go any further, I'm going to be making a basic sauce, and then I'm going to show you the options where you can add flavourings and you can actually change the nature of that sauce completely. So traditionally we might think of a tomato sauce as being Italian and therefore it's got the garlic and herb flavours, but there are actually so many other ways that you can use a tomato sauce, and that's what I'm going to be showing you today. So we'll get going. So I've got onions and garlic. That is pretty much the basic of any tomato sauce. It's pretty much the basic for actually a lot of sauces. So peeling an onion is quite often a very personal thing. This is how I do it. I cut it in half, I take the skin off, but I don't remove the tail or the end bit because that allows me to hold it. Okay, so I'll show you in a moment. So I'm going to use 2 onions because I think that's about right for any quantity you're doing. And the more onion you use and the more garlic, the more flavour you have. So it will really start to add in that flavour. Some onions are obviously much easier to deal with than others. Okay, so got that. So I then take that tail off, but I keep the end bit. I'm going to chop these really, really finely because the last thing you want are mouthfuls of onion in your sauce. So you can see very, very fine. As I get to the end, I'm just going to turn it slightly and get those corners. And then you've got the tail that you have kept, and that way it holds everything together. So I'll just chop these. It's really important to cut it fine so that it's much tastier when you're eating it. We're going to cook it for a long time, and so a lot of the onion, it won't appear diced, but it's still easier if you start off with finely diced onions. Now, a sharp knife actually makes a big difference. I sharpened this literally just before we started, and I'll show you what I use because it really, really makes a big difference. Okay, so that one's come apart a little bit, but it doesn't matter. We've just got a tiny little section here. And and we'll remove that tail. Okay, so that's your diced onions. I'm going to get going with frying. Different oils you can use. If you're making an Italian flavoured sauce, then olive oil is fantastic. With olive oil, I don't want you to be overheating it. Olive oil doesn't like to be overheated. You lose a lot of flavour, but more importantly, that oil can become dangerous to use. So I would really make sure you don't overheat it, and you certainly don't want to see any smoking with olive oil. So if you have overheated it, so you've popped it in and you've forgotten about it and you suddenly see smoke, I would actually discard it, because if you don't, you are eating an oil that has changed chemical nature and can be dangerous. Now, what I'm going to do is use the oil that the sun-dried tomatoes came in. You've got a lot of extra flavour there. It's another oil to use, and there's no point in discarding it, particularly right now when you can't get to the supermarkets as often as you like. So it's a great one to use. So you just let it heat a little bit, and until you can hear that sizzling sound as you fry that. Now, with onions, what we're looking for is that they are translucent, so we don't really want them to burn, which means we want them on a high heat to start with, and then as they start going translucent, so it's a little bit, I suppose almost see-through, but they're not quite, you turn the heat down. And the key thing with onions and garlic is to cook them for a longer period on a lower heat, and that caramelizes them. It brings out the flavour, and that's really a big part of where you get that rich tomato sauce. So while that is cooking, I'm going to do the garlic. The easiest way to do garlic is to press it, and then it will peel very easily. So if you've got 2 onions, I would say 4 cloves of garlic, or because here they're quite big, I'm going to go with 3. But to be honest, you can do more and you'll just get a more flavoursome sauce. But I would basically say 2 cloves of garlic, 2 large cloves of garlic for each onion. So that will give you a gauge. If you haven't got enough, then it's not a problem. Just don't use as much. I'm going to chop this rather than crushing, because I think it, in a sauce, it just means that it can really cook through and caramelise with the onions as well. When you're chopping, keep your fingers on the end, and then that way you've got control over your knife, and then you can just keep scooping the garlic all the way round, and you can just keep scooping that down until you get to a really lovely finely chopped garlic. Okay, so but the key thing here is keeping your hand on the end and then just scooping it all into the middle and keep doing that. Okay, so whether you can see, it's just starting to be that translucent look that I was describing. And now I'm going to add the garlic as well. Might look like a lot of garlic, but honestly, that's where a lot of the flavour comes from in the sauce once you've allowed it to cook. Okay. Now, onions and garlic are all part of the same family. They're part of the allium family, which means they have a lot of sugar in them. So when we talk about caramelizing, what we're trying to do is release those sugars so that they will caramelize and give you that depth of flavor. But the only way they can do that is if you cook it on a lower heat and also for a longer period. So if you're in a rush, then you're not going to get that as much. Doesn't mean to say it won't work, but because if you've got time, it's definitely worth doing. You'll see the difference. Okay, so I'm just going to turn that down, cover it, and allow that to cook slightly. I'm not adding any salt at this stage because if you add salt, it's going to release water. If I release water into that sauce, then it's almost going to boil it, and I don't want that to happen just yet. Again, I want it to caramelize. I want the sugars to release, and I want the whole thing to caramelize. So just going to give it a few minutes to really allow that to happen, and then I'll add salt and pepper and the tomatoes, and then we're good to go on that. So, how are we doing? Are there any questions or anything at the moment? Let me know. So let me know if you're out there. So how's it looking? Have you made a tomato sauce before? Is that something you've done? Any tips you'd like to offer us? So it'd be lovely to hear from you. Okay, so what I now want to do is just show you some of the different options that we can do. Sometimes if you want a really thick, sweet tomato sauce, rather than adding sugar, which obviously will achieve that, but because we don't really want to be adding refined sugar to any of our cooking, and certainly not savoury, a carrot is a really fantastic way to do that. Now, I'm going to grate that into it, because if you grate it, it will almost disintegrate by the time it's cooked. So you're not going to, don't worry about eating mouthfuls of carrots, because that won't actually happen, but it'll just give it certainly texture and also a sweetness. But above all, you are boosting the nutritional value of this sauce. It's a very easy thing to do. Just a carrot, you've got vitamin A, beta-carotene, which is the precursor to vitamin A. So basically you need beta-carotene to produce vitamin A, and vitamin A is a very powerful antioxidant. So right now we need a lot of help to boost our immune systems, and vitamin A is one of those antioxidant vitamins that will help you do that. There are three main antioxidant vitamins: vitamins A, vitamin C, and vitamins E. So ACE, ACE. Those are your antioxidant vitamins. If you've got those, that's really going to help boost your immune system, which right now would be of help. So, I've let that sweat a little bit, and you can see that some of the water is starting to come out, but not too much. Now that I'm going to add everything else, particularly salt, it will start releasing a little bit more of the water. So, we're going to add salt. Don't be worried about adding salt. Pepper. If you're making your own food, you know exactly how much salt is going into your home cooked food. If you're buying ready-made processed food, you don't know how much salt, and I can tell you there is probably way more than you realise, which then increases your taste buds for salt, which means that everything you want to eat has to be salty for it to taste good. And it's a knock-on effect. So if you're adding your own salt, you can keep that under control and keep your taste buds under control as well. So we've got salt and pepper. This is where I'm going to add the carrots in, because I want those to cook into it. Pretty much want them to disintegrate, because then you're not going to notice them. So I'll just cook those through. If you've got any fussy children who may not eat a carrot, they certainly won't notice it in this. In fact, quite the opposite. It will give a lovely, rich, sweet flavour, which can be quite appealing to the little ones. So if we've got any kids watching now, then I really hope they'll have a go making this, because it's a very easy thing. And to be honest, if you can make a good tomato sauce, there's so much you can do with it. So I'm going to use tins, because I don't want to waste the fresh right now. If I've got access to plenty of fresh, then I may well do. But right now, I'm just going to use the tins. Okay, so we've got how much in advance can you make it? That is a brilliant, brilliant question, because one of the great things about a tomato sauce is if you think about all the ingredients in it, there's nothing fresh in it. So we don't have butter, we don't have anything that could effectively go off. It's all pretty much larder ingredients. So we can actually make this and keep it for, frankly, almost 2 weeks in the fridge. Because there's nothing really that's going to go off, and particularly if we've cooked it for a long period. So I'm just breaking up the tomatoes now. So another question, what are you making? Well, I am making a basic tomato sauce. Very basic, and then in a minute when I've got this on to cook, I'm going to talk to you about what you can use these sauces for. So I've basically got finely diced onion, 2 onions. For each onion, I'm using 2 cloves of garlic, finely diced. I'm frying it in a little bit of either olive oil, or I use the oil from a sun-dried tomato, which I keep, I don't throw away. And then I've let that cook for about 5 minutes without salt, without pepper. And then once they've started to go a bit translucent, I've now added some grated carrot and 2 tins of whole plum tomatoes. Right, so I'm not going to be too worried about breaking up all of these tomatoes, because they will break up and disintegrate once we've cooked this. Okay, now this is where you can decide what sort of flavour you want your sauce to be. Now let's say you want it with pasta. So it's a bolognese type sauce, but it's vegan, so you are obviously not adding meat. This is where you would add herbs. You can add any herbs you like. Now this mixture I've got here is mixed. So we've got thyme, rosemary, marjoram, oregano, sage, a whole load of herbs there. If you've only got one of those, it will work equally well. If I had to choose one as the only herb, I would choose oregano for an Italian flavoured sauce. I think it gives that typical Italian flavour. The one thing I would say is use plenty. Don't skimp on the herbs. Again, that's where that flavour comes from. If you're putting it in early enough, the flavours will infuse and they will subside, and it will be a lot more subtle, but you'll have a really fabulous, rich sauce. So I would say certainly 1 tablespoon, but actually I'm going to add more like 2, because it will be so much nicer. And you're adding it in here once the sauce has got the liquid with it, because otherwise you're going to burn and scorch those herbs, which will change the flavour. Whereas right now, they're just going to infuse into it. It's going to release the oils from the herbs and release the flavour, and that sauce will taste amazing. Okay, now, it's not looking amazing right now, and that's because we're going to cook this. If you've got the time, on a low heat, I would honestly recommend you cook it for around an hour. It sounds like a long time, but you will see the difference. If you don't have the time, I would turn the heat up, bring it to the boil, and cook it for about 15-20 minutes, okay? So it's almost like a sort of quick hit. I tell you when you can do that is when you're then going to use it, say in the oven, as a topping for something in the oven, like a lasagna or something like that. But that's because you're then going to carry on cooking it in the oven. But I would really try and get something like this on, you know, on a Sunday or a Saturday when we've got more time. Right now we do have a little bit more time if you're all working from home, and we're all able to devote that time. But when life gets busy again, then try and make it at a time or an evening where you can just leave it to bubble away. It doesn't need any attention after that. Okay, so any questions, please do pop them on there. What I'm now going to do is I've made one. Here's one I made earlier. Okay. Now, this one didn't have carrots in. This is simply onions, garlic, and tinned tomatoes. But I've cooked it for around, I would say about 45 minutes. But I'm going to use it in the oven, so it will carry on cooking and infusing a little bit more. So what I'm going to make is an aubergine, my aubergine and chickpea moussaka. So I've already cooked these aubergines, but I'm going to show you what I did because hopefully you'll see how easy it is. Once you've cooked these can now go into the fridge and they can sit there for a week or so. So if you've got the oven on and you've got aubergines, that's assuming you can get hold of them at the moment, then you can prepare them and pop them in the oven. Because once they're cooked and your tomato sauce is cooked, actually assembling it is really easy. And you'll thank yourself when you want to put a meal together, you want it a tasty, healthy meal, but you haven't had a chance to do the prep. But if the prep's already done, it's easy. So I'll show you what I did here. Literally just roasted those. I kept one back to show you. So whole aubergine, take that end off, and you literally just cut it into thick discs. I suppose about 1 centimetre. You really do need a sharp knife for this. Okay. So they're just in thick discs. You don't need to layer them and put salt on and allow the water to come down. I think that's something that people used to do because aubergines used to taste quite bitter. Nowadays they don't taste so bitter, and I do think it's just a step that might then dissuade you from using it and might then mean that you don't end up using it. I don't find aubergines to be bitter, and I never do it. So it's entirely up to you. If you've got the time and you think it makes a difference to the end result, then obviously feel free to do that. But I certainly don't, and I'm always looking for ways of cutting out stages, because then a meal is much more likely to happen. So I'll get the oven tray. Aubergines are renowned for absorbing a lot of oil, but they'll only absorb the oil that you put with them. Okay, so my way around that is just simply not to put that much. So I always use silicone sheets, and because nothing sticks to them, put a little bit on the bottom, and then just make sure that that's all coated. Lay them out. They do need to be laid out individually. Tiny bit on top, so really try and drizzle gently. A bit of pepper. And this is so that when it's cooked and you're using them, they've got that added flavour, not too much salt. And that's literally it. We'll go into the oven, 180 for around 40 minutes, and they'll come out just like that. Okay, so if you've got the oven on, pop them in and have those ready to use, because then there's so much you can do with them. So these I'm actually going to use to make my aubergine and chickpea moussaka right now with you. But these I might well use in a salad, maybe with some tahini dressing or something like that, because they're just ready and good to go. So I'll pop those back in the oven. Okay, so here's a dish I'm going to be using, and the chickpeas, hopefully you've got these in your larder. If you don't have chickpeas, any beans will do. So, white beans, cannellini beans, butter beans, anything, they will do. I'm going to rinse them and drain them. Well, drain them and rinse them. Essentially, I've got everything I need to put this together. The flavour is all in this sauce, which is why it's really worth taking the time to make that sauce, because everything else will go really well with it, but if that is flavourless, it's not going to be as nice. But we're actually going to change that sauce into a more Middle Eastern flavours, and the way I'm going to do that is using mixed spice. If you haven't used mixed spice, so you're probably used to using mixed spice in desserts, so rice puddings or custards or certainly perhaps crumbles, but actually it works very, very well if you want to change the feel and the taste and of a meal and make it a little bit more Mediterranean or Middle Eastern. So I'll show you, we're simply going to be layering that now. So we'll start with a layer of the tomato sauce and a few chickpeas. Not many, because as we layer, it will start to get very chickpea heavy. So we're going to use, that's just one tin, and I think that's plenty. Okay. And then a nice thick layer of sauce. And now you can put a few more chickpeas. Remember that chickpeas in a vegan meal is going to offer you the protein that you really need to make sure you include in every meal. So they're protein and they're fibre. They're soluble fibre, so they're the type of fibre that will get into your bloodstream and remove any nasties like toxins or used up hormones or anything that really needs to be got rid of will attach to soluble fibre. And something like chickpeas and all that family of chickpeas, lentils, all of those are good sources of soluble fibre. Now, because I want to change the flavour, this is where I'm going to add a sprinkle of mixed spice. Not too much, because it is quite strong. And then also for extra flavour, a little bit of olive oil. I have tried the tomato sauce and I know it's well seasoned, but if it isn't, this would be a time to add a little bit of salt and pepper as well. I did also season the aubergine, so I know that they've got a bit of extra flavour too. So then we'll add in the rest of this aubergine. And hopefully that will fit. I think it will. So that was about 3 aubergines there. The rest of the chickpeas. That's it. I'm going to just put another quick drizzle of olive oil. And finally, the rest of the tomato. And that's it. So you can see now that because we've got everything prepped, putting this together is actually really easy. And imagine if you come in at the end of the day and you've got all of this prepped, but you haven't had a chance to cook it all, then this would be a very easy meal for you to put straight into the oven. I'm going to put it in for around 30 minutes minimum, but I'll check it. What I want it is just to hold itself together and to be a little bit crispy, but not overly, because everything is cooked in it. The tomato sauce is cooked and so is the aubergine. An alternative, if you don't, this is a vegan version. If you don't want this to be vegan, then you can add in some mozzarella, or you can also add in some thin slices of halloumi cheese, and you'll just layer those in, I would say, one of the layers, in a whole layer, and then add everything else on top. Okay, so that's a really easy swap or addition if you don't want it to be a vegan version. But that's basically ready to go into the oven right now. So I've made the tomato sauce with you. We'll just have a quick look. You can see already how that's now starting to look a little bit more rich, but we've still got a way to go. And the smells are fantastic. I can really smell those herbs, whereas I didn't put the herbs in this one because I wanted the freedom to add in the mixed spice or anything else. So I would say that that is going to be a really tasty sauce for the base of a pizza, or obviously some pasta as well. So that's a sort of immediate one. Other flavours that you can add are smoked paprika. And this then gives it a much more smoky flavour, perhaps those Mexican tastes and flavours. So that would be really fun to use. And then you can put that with some peppers, and you can make the shakshuka, which I have on my website. If you don't know what shakshuka is, it's basically peppers, red pepper, thinly sliced with a tomato sauce, and I use a little bit of smoked paprika to give it a little bit of a kick. You cook that in a frying pan and you would add the fried eggs on top. If you want to do that, the basics of making the tomato sauce are exactly the same, and you're frying in a red pepper with it. And that's a fantastic brunch meal over the weekend when you've got everybody around with you, or whoever is in your household at the moment. So on my website, you'll find that recipe for shakshuka. It's spelled S-H-A-K-S-H-U-K-A. So it's a Middle Eastern dish that is peppers and tomatoes with eggs on top. And it's fantastic with some crusty bread, pita bread, or just on its own with a salad as well. So you've got good protein there, good vegetables, and great tomatoes with that. So one last thing, this sort of sauce is fantastic with a little bit of chili in it as well. So actually I could have added just a few little chili flakes on one of those layers, and that would have just given it a little bit more richness as well. So you can see there are so many options once you've made that basic tomato sauce. You can just do it for pasta, you can just do it for a pizza base, for example, by adding in some oregano or mixed herbs, or you can turn it into a moussaka type dish, as I've done here. We're using mixed spice or a shakshuka using paprika. You'll find this recipe on my website. It's an aubergine and chickpea moussaka, and as I said, you'll also find the shakshuka recipe on my website as well. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you've enjoyed it. I would love to do more of these, and I probably will. I'm just going to work out, what's the best time. You tell me, what's the best time for me to be doing these? I know people are watching in different time zones and different times of the day. We are still working during the daytime, but perhaps the sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock time suits many of you. But you let me know. You tell me what you want. I'm here to try and hopefully offer you exactly what you want. I am available. Any questions, feel free to put them in under this video. I will go in once I've finished this and answer as many as I can. Do stay with me on Instagram if you need inspiration. It's difficult right now because I'm sure you're cooking so many meals. If you need inspiration, I'm putting on my Instagram pretty much everything that we're eating, and certainly ideas. I've got some historical photos of things that we have eaten that I will be using. But the main thing is to try and inspire you and motivate you to cook and use what you've got in the kitchen. So if there's anything you've got and you don't know how to use it, let me know and I'll see if I can come up with something for you. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you so much for joining me live. And if you're not watching this live, you know where to get hold of me. I'm May Simpkin Nutrition on Facebook, May Simpkin Nutrition on Instagram, and I'm on there pretty much all the time these days. Okay? Thank you so much.